You don't always notice what's happening at first. Toxic people don't walk in announcing their damage. It builds slowly, like a leak you ignore until the whole floor is rotted beneath you. One moment it's a sarcastic remark you brush off. The next it's a guilt trip disguised as love. Then one day you look around and realize you're not even the same person anymore. You're quieter. You're more anxious. You double-check everything you say. You're drained, unsure, resentful, and you don't even know why. That's what happens when you stay too long in the wrong energy. You get infected because that's exactly what toxicity is. It's not always explosive. It's corrosive. And the most dangerous kind is subtle. It's disguised as jokes. You're too sensitive. It's disguised as concern. I'm just looking out for you. It's disguised as loyalty. I've been there for you, haven't I? And before you even see it, you've internalized their dysfunction. Their negativity becomes your lens. Their fear becomes your hesitation. Their chaos becomes your norm, and slowly your standards collapse. You start tolerating things you once said you never would. You start rationalizing behavior that drains you. You start shrinking just to avoid confrontation. You weren't born second-guessing yourself. That was taught. You weren't born afraid to speak your truth. That was conditioned. And the people who were supposed to protect your peace became the ones chipping away at it. This is what makes toxic people so dangerous. They don't just hurt you, they rewire you. They change how you see yourself, how you speak to yourself, how you move through the world. And they do it without ever lifting a hand. They do it with words, with silence, with patterns, with control. And by the time you recognize it, you're already caught in it. And the more emotionally intelligent you are, the more you try to understand them. You want to see the best in them? You try to help. You convince yourself they didn't mean it, that they're just hurt. That if you love harder, they'll change. But what you don't realize is that empathy without boundaries becomes self-destruction. You're not healing them. You're enabling them. You're absorbing their wounds and calling it love. That's not strength. That's survival. That's your nervous system trying to keep the peace. That's your mind learning to adapt to someone who refuses to adapt with you. You can't build confidence in a war zone. You can't become who you're meant to be if you're constantly dodging emotional landmines. If you have to brace yourself every time you walk into the room. If you feel unsafe being honest. If you feel exhausted after every interaction. That's not a relationship. That's exposure. And the longer you stay exposed, the more damage is done. Not to your body, but to your mind, to your identity, to your self-trust. Because toxic people don't just drain you emotionally. They start convincing you that you're the problem, that your boundaries are selfish, that your standards are too high, that your gut can't be trusted, and when your gut is silenced long enough, it stops speaking up. You stop knowing what's real. You stop believing yourself. You outsource your reality to people who benefit from your confusion. That's how they keep control. They don't overpower you. They slowly disconnect you from your center, from your truth. And that's when your confidence collapses. Not because you weren't strong enough, but because you stayed around people who never wanted you to be strong in the first place. The cost of staying around toxicity is your identity, your clarity, your energy. You don't even have to argue for it to affect you. Just being in their presence can drain you. Just receiving their text can make your body tense. Just hearing their name can shift your mood. That's not connection. That's control. And it's not always loud. Sometimes it's in the subtle digs, the eye rolls, the backhanded compliments, the way they talk over you, the way they ignore your growth, the way they suddenly go silent when you succeed, the way they withhold support to keep you dependent. And every time you tolerate it, you teach yourself that it's okay, that this is just how relationships work. That love has to hurt. That friendship is supposed to feel like a job interview. That family means accepting disrespect. But it doesn't. And the moment you stop defending their dysfunction is the moment you start defending your peace. The moment you stop making excuses is the moment your confidence starts coming back. Not because everything is healed overnight, but because you stop drinking the poison and expecting it to taste like love. Sometimes the most powerful move you can make isn't growth. It's removal. The quiet decision to stop entertaining conversations that leave you empty. The silent boundary of not responding to the bait. The private choice to stop participating in dysfunction you didn't cause. That's how you protect your energy. That's how you start healing. Not by fixing them, but by freeing yourself. Because your confidence isn't just built by what you do. It's protected by what you walk away from. Confidence isn't something you're born with. It's something you build. But the mistake people make is thinking they can build it in a hostile environment. You can't create inner strength when the outer world is tearing you apart. You can't become your best self when you're surrounded by people who benefit from your self-doubt. And toxic people, they don't just challenge your confidence, they systematically dismantle it. They do it in a way that looks subtle, sounds harmless, even feels familiar. But don't be fooled, that's how emotional erosion works. Quiet, calculated, and consistent. It starts with little things. They question your tone. They roll their eyes when you express yourself. They interrupt you when you speak. They correct you, not to help you grow, but to reassert control. And every time they do it, your voice gets a little quieter. Your shoulders drop a little more. You start second-guessing not just what you say, but who you are. That's not conflict. That's corrosion. That's what happens when you're constantly around people who chip away at your sense of self and then call it love or say they're just being honest. You find yourself trying harder to please them. You adjust your words, change your opinions, keep your achievements to yourself just to avoid judgment. And the crazy part? You don't even realize you're doing it. You tell yourself you're being thoughtful. You tell yourself you're trying to keep the peace. But what you're really doing is silencing your truth to accommodate someone else's discomfort. And the more you do that, the more your confidence fades. Not because you don't have any, but because you're too busy suppressing it. This is how toxic dynamics operate. Not with open attacks, but with subtle control. They use shame. They use guilt. They use silence as punishment. One minute they're supportive, the next they're cold. And you're constantly on edge, wondering what version of them you're going to get. That kind of instability trains your nervous system to stay in survival mode. You become hyper-aware, always scanning for signs of danger. You don't speak your truth, you calculate it. You don't ask for what you need. You edit yourself to avoid triggering them. And you call that a relationship. You call that a friendship. You call that family. But let's call it what it is: manipulation. Maybe not loud, maybe not obvious, but still manipulation. They use your loyalty against you. They twist your empathy into a weakness. And when you finally set a boundary, they flip the script. Suddenly you're the problem. You're ungrateful. You're dramatic. You're selfish. And for a moment you believe them. Because that's what emotional manipulation does. It doesn't just mess with your head. It makes you question your own instincts. Your confidence doesn't just take a hit. It gets rewritten by someone else's narrative. That's why being around toxic people isn't just unhealthy. It's unsafe. Unsafe for your growth. Unsafe for your goals. Unsafe for your emotional and psychological well-being. Because over time, their behavior doesn't just affect how you feel. It affects what you believe. You start believing you're difficult. You start believing you're hard to love. You start believing you should settle. And you'll never feel powerful when your mind is rehearsing someone else's script. You'll never feel strong when you're in environments that benefit from your silence. And you'll never feel respected by people who only value you when you're small. You were not meant to walk on eggshells to keep someone else comfortable. You were not meant to dull your shine so someone else doesn't feel insecure. You were not meant to accept passive aggression, mood swings, emotional withdrawal, and manipulation as normal. If the only time they're kind is when you comply, that's not respect. It's control. And you do not owe anyone access to you just because they've been around a long time. Time served doesn't equal a right to violate your peace. You can't heal where you're still being harmed. You can't trust yourself when every decision you make is filtered through someone else's expectations. And you can't feel confident when you're constantly adjusting your personality to avoid emotional punishment. That's not growth. That's self-abandonment. You become a shell of who you are, always available to others, never available to yourself. Always saying yes when your gut screams no. Always taking the blame just to avoid the backlash. And the longer you live like that, the more disconnected you become from your own inner compass. So if your confidence feels like it's missing, check your environment. Check your circle. Check who's in your ear and in your space. Because some of the people you're fighting to keep close are the very ones keeping you from rising. And if that's the case, you don't need a new goal, you need a clean cut. Because real confidence starts with choosing peace over performance. choosing truth over toxicity, choosing yourself. Fully and unapologetically, you were taught to stay, to fix, to be loyal, to make it work no matter how much it cost you. You were conditioned to hold on tightly to people just because they were there first, just because you have history, just because cutting them off feels harsh. But loyalty without boundaries becomes self-destruction. Because when you stay loyal to someone who constantly violates your peace, what you're really doing is abandoning yourself. You're betraying your own needs just to make someone else feel comfortable, and there's nothing noble about that. There are people who will demand your loyalty but never earn your respect. People who expect you to show up, to sacrifice, to explain, to shrink, but who never do the same in return. They make everything about them. Their emotions, their stories, their pain, and the moment you assert your own needs, they make you feel guilty for it. That's not love. That's not support. That's not mutual. That's control wrapped in emotional blackmail. And the longer you stay, the more damage it does. Not just to your energy, but to your sense of identity. You start telling yourself stories that don't belong to you. You tell yourself you're difficult. You tell yourself you're hard to love. You start believing you ask for too much when all you really want is respect. But toxic people twist the narrative. They make your boundaries look like betrayal. They make your silence look like punishment. They turn your healing into a threat, and you get caught in this loop where you're constantly trying to prove yourself to someone who already decided that nothing you do will ever be enough. You try to explain yourself. You try to over-communicate. You give chances, you make excuses. You hope they'll change, and every time they say sorry, you believe them, until the pattern repeats. Again, and again and again. Because they're not sorry they hurt you. They're sorry you caught them. They're sorry you're pulling away. They're sorry you're finally waking up to the fact that this connection is costing you too much. And they'll do whatever it takes to pull you back in. Not because they love you, but because they love control and you think walking away makes you the bad guy. But it doesn't. It makes you honest. It makes you healthy. It makes you someone who finally decided that your peace matters more than someone else's dysfunction. It means you're no longer confusing loyalty with permission. You're no longer sacrificing your values to keep a connection that's rooted in guilt and obligation. Because the truth is this: you can care about someone and still choose to walk away. You can love someone and still know they're not good for you. You can be loyal to your own healing without having to explain it to anyone else. You have a right to outgrow people who keep you in survival mode. You have a right to leave relationships where your boundaries are seen as a threat. You have a right to say, enough, when someone's presence costs you clarity, confidence, and self-respect. And it doesn't matter how long you've known them. It doesn't matter what you've been through. It doesn't matter how much potential they have. At some point, you have to choose your future over your familiarity, because familiarity can keep you in bondage just as easily as fear can. You are not required to destroy yourself for anyone. You are not responsible for fixing people who refuse to grow. You are not obligated to sacrifice your mental, emotional, and spiritual health just to prove you're loyal. Real loyalty isn't about staying in pain, it's about standing in truth. And sometimes the truth is that walking away is the most loyal thing you can do. Loyal to your values. Loyal to your peace. Loyal to the version of you that's waiting on the other side of letting go. And yes, it's going to hurt. Yes, you're going to question yourself. You'll feel the pull to go back. You'll remember the good times. You'll feel that sting of guilt when they come knocking again. But don't mistake pain for regret. Pain is part of the process. Pain is your nervous system detoxing the dysfunction. Pain doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. It means you finally made the right one. The one that honors your voice. The one that protects your soul. The one that sets the standard for how the rest of the world will treat you moving forward. The person who chooses peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, and boundaries over burnout is not cruel. They're conscious. They're awake. They're strong enough to stop negotiating with people who never had their best interest in mind. And that strength doesn't come easy. It comes from breaking cycles, from shedding guilt, from accepting that your well-being comes before anyone's comfort, that your purpose comes before their approval, that your future cannot wait for them to catch up. There's nothing selfish about self-respect. There's nothing wrong with drawing a line and deciding that your time, your space, your energy will no longer be available to people who only show up to drain it. You were not put here to constantly explain your boundaries to people who refuse to hear you. You were not built to carry the emotional weight of those who weaponize your empathy. Let them go. Let the chaos fall away. Let the silence speak. And when you do, you'll start to feel your power again. Not because you fought harder, but because you finally stopped fighting for someone who was never in your corner. Closure is one of the biggest traps people fall into when dealing with toxic relationships. You wait for it. You hold out for that one conversation where it all makes sense. Where they finally see the damage they caused. Where they finally validate your pain, take responsibility, and give you the peace you've been craving. But here's the hard truth. Most toxic people will never give you closure. They'll never own their behavior because it requires a level of self-awareness they're not ready to face. And if you keep waiting on it, you're handing over your power to the very person who kept taking it from you in the first place. They'll spin it around on you. Say you're overreacting, that you're too sensitive, that you're making a big deal out of nothing. And if you let them, they'll twist the narrative so tightly that you start to believe maybe they're right. That maybe it was your fault. That maybe you should have tried harder. That maybe you misunderstood. But deep down, you know. You know when something's off. You know when your spirit feels heavy every time you talk to them. You know when their words sound sweet but land like daggers. And yet, you stay, you wait. You hope, you wait for them to acknowledge what they did. You wait for them to say they're sorry. But closure isn't something they give you. It's something you decide to give yourself. You don't need their permission to move on. You don't need their apology to begin healing. What you need is the courage to stop replaying their story and start writing your own. You don't need to understand why they did what they did. You don't need to sit across from them while they fake sincerity. You don't need their validation to confirm that your pain was real. When you keep chasing closure from someone who lacks emotional maturity, you're not seeking truth. You're seeking hope. Hope that they'll change. Hope that maybe there's still something worth saving. But hope is not a strategy. Hope can trap you in a loop. A loop where you keep returning to the same wound, looking for someone else to stitch it shut. But they won't. They won't, because accountability requires empathy. It requires self-confrontation. It requires humility. And people who are toxic often lack all three. You keep giving them opportunities to redeem themselves, and they keep giving you more reasons to walk away. That's not growth. That's a cycle. That's your fear of letting go disguised as forgiveness. And the longer you stay in it, the more pieces of yourself you lose. Until one day you don't recognize who you are anymore. You're not strong because you held on. You're strong because you finally let go. Not with bitterness, not with revenge. But with clarity. You get clear on the fact that people who care about you don't destroy your peace. People who respect you don't play games with your mind. People who love you don't put conditions on your worth. That's the clarity that fuels your decision. That's the kind of truth that breaks the cycle. Because you don't need another explanation. You don't need a final conversation. You don't need the drama of one last fight. You just need a decision. A clean, private, unapologetic decision to stop going back to places that hurt. They may never admit what they did. They may never acknowledge the sleepless nights, the anxiety, the confusion they caused. But that's okay. They don't have to. Your healing is not dependent on their honesty. Your growth doesn't require their participation. Your freedom is not waiting inside their apology. It's sitting inside your decision to be done. Done explaining yourself. Done justifying your boundaries. Done tolerating less than you deserve, and you'll feel the pull. The urge to send one more message. To explain one more thing. To clarify your side just one more time. That's your old self. Still trying to fix it, still trying to make peace. But peace isn't found in their inbox. It's found in your silence, your stillness, your exit. You don't need closure from the person who caused the wound. You just need to stop reopening it. You stop touching it, stop picking at it, stop hoping that they'll suddenly become who you imagined they could be. That version of them doesn't exist. What does exist is your ability to reclaim yourself. Closure doesn't come in the form of a perfect ending. It comes when you stop needing one. It comes when you stop needing to be understood by someone who refused to understand you the entire time. It comes when you no longer feel the need to defend why you walked away. It comes when you realize the silence you give them now is the response they earned. Not because you're petty, not because you're cold, but because peace requires discipline. And healing requires boundaries. When you reach that point, you no longer carry resentment. You no longer need to be right. You no longer seek revenge or recognition. You just move differently. You protect your space. You protect your time. You protect your heart. And not because you're guarded, but because you're wise. Because you've learned what happens when you keep trying to get closure from people who only understand control. You spend so much of your life trying to help people. Trying to see the good in them. Trying to believe in their potential more than they believe in themselves. You tell yourself they just need time, just need love, just need someone to stay by their side. But there's a difference between someone who's struggling and someone who's choosing to stay broken. There's a difference between helping and enabling. And when it comes to toxic people, the hardest truth to swallow is this: some people don't want to get better because their brokenness gives them power. The victim identity gives them leverage. It allows them to manipulate, to excuse their behavior, to avoid responsibility. It's their shield, it's their weapon. And the moment you try to introduce truth, they deflect. The moment you try to create a boundary, they punish. The moment you stop tolerating dysfunction, they turn it around on you. You'll hear lines like, "After everything I've done for you," or "You're abandoning me when I need you most." That's not vulnerability. That's control. They don't want support. They want submission. They don't want healing. They want permission to keep bleeding on people who didn't cut them. And if you're not careful, your empathy will keep you chained to someone who uses their pain as a reason to hurt you. They don't want to hear the truth. They don't want to be challenged. They don't want to grow. They want you to stay exactly where they've placed you, beneath their control. Because the moment you step out of that role, the moment you reclaim your power, they lose access. That's when the manipulation intensifies. That's when the gaslighting begins. That's when you start hearing how selfish, cold, and disloyal you are. And you'll start to question yourself, even when your gut knows exactly what's going on. You cannot save someone who doesn't want to be saved. You cannot make someone change who refuses to take accountability. You cannot continue handing out energy to a person who turns every conversation into a battlefield. You weren't made to fix people. You weren't built to be the emotional sponge for everyone's unresolved trauma. And you're not a bad person for finally saying, "I can't do this anymore." You're not cold for stepping back. You're not cruel for choosing peace. You're just finally honest about the fact that you've been slowly drowning while trying to pull someone else out of their own mess. At some point, love without limits turns into a cage. And it doesn't matter how many times you say you care, how many times you show up, how many nights you stay awake trying to solve problems that were never yours to begin with. If they don't want to grow, they won't. You'll sacrifice everything, your time, your energy, your clarity, just to watch them stay exactly the same. And when you finally burn out, they'll find someone else to latch onto. Because that's what toxic patterns do. They move, they shift, they feed on availability. And your job is to stop being available. There's nothing wrong with supporting people through pain, but there's something very wrong with allowing someone's pain to become your prison. And there's something even more dangerous about believing that your love will be the cure. That's not love. That's illusion. That's codependency wrapped in self-sacrifice. You don't earn respect by overextending yourself for someone who disrespects your boundaries. You don't earn loyalty by betraying your own needs. And you don't build connection by constantly tolerating behavior that leaves you depleted and confused. You teach people how to treat you by what you allow. And every time you excuse the manipulation, every time you rationalize the inconsistency, every time you accept the apology without change behavior, you reinforce the pattern. Not because you're weak, but because you're compassionate. But that compassion needs direction, it needs discernment. Because if not, it becomes a weapon used against you. And toxic people know how to exploit that. They study you. They figure out your buttons. They play innocent. They play victim. And by the time you realize what's happening, your sense of reality is already cracked. So, no, you're not here to fix anyone. You're here to grow, to evolve, to protect your peace, to live with purpose and clarity. And anyone who continually pulls you out of alignment with that needs to go. You're not abandoning them. You're just refusing to abandon yourself anymore. You're finally realizing that love without respect is manipulation. That kindness without limits becomes martyrdom. And that giving people more of what they already misuse doesn't help. It harms. Walking away isn't about being right. It's about getting real. Real with the fact that your well-being matters, that your peace is sacred, that your energy is not infinite, that your life is not a rehabilitation center for people who refuse to take ownership of their own lives. You're allowed to draw the line. You're allowed to enforce it. You're allowed to walk away without the dramatic goodbye, without the justification, without the guilt, because you finally see the truth. They were never going to change, not because they can't, but because it benefits them not to. You don't just cut toxic people to protect yourself from harm. You cut them to make space for who you're becoming. Because the truth is, there's no room for peace when your life is full of noise, and toxic people are noise. Loud when you set boundaries, silent when you need support, constantly shifting the energy so you're always the one adjusting. You try to stay calm, they escalate. You speak up, they play victim. You pull away, they pull harder. And all that energy, drained. That's what it costs to keep them around. The price is clarity. The price is your presence. The price is your potential. You can't grow in chaos. You can't become powerful in places that make you feel powerless. You can't build something meaningful when you're constantly cleaning up emotional messes that aren't yours. And when you finally get tired of explaining, tired of defending, tired of feeling like you're never enough, that's the moment you begin to wake up. You realize that walking away isn't the loss. Staying was, staying in spaces where you weren't seen, giving to people who only took, shrinking to keep others comfortable. And you finally get honest, something has to go. And it's not going to be you. You are not difficult for wanting peace. You are not selfish for cutting off what doesn't align. You are not cold for no longer giving endless chances to people who never changed. You're evolving. And evolution requires separation. It requires subtraction. It requires letting go of everything that keeps you circling the same emotional drain. That means conversations that go nowhere. That means apologies followed by the same behavior. That means the people who only check in when they need something. The ones who expect access to you while giving you nothing but drama in return. Your energy is currency. Your attention is power. Your presence is a privilege. And not everyone gets to have it. Not everyone deserves a seat at your table just because they knew you before you knew yourself. Some people are only familiar with the version of you who tolerated anything to keep peace. But that version is gone. The new one sees clearly, feels deeply, speaks truth without apology. And that version doesn't explain why they cut ties. That version just leaves quietly and completely. The shift is internal first. You no longer feel anxious around their silence. You no longer feel responsible for their emotions. You no longer scramble to make things right when you weren't the one who made them wrong. You stop overthinking every interaction. You stop tiptoeing around their moods. You stop pretending everything's okay when your gut has been screaming for months that it's not. And slowly the fog lifts. You start to see yourself again. You start to trust your instincts again. You stop living in reaction and start moving with intention. That's when peace arrives. Not just the kind that feels good for a moment, but the kind that anchors. The kind that's quiet but steady. The kind that lets you sleep deeply, think clearly, move freely. And you don't find that by fixing anyone. You find that by letting go of what you were never meant to carry, of who you were never meant to save, of what you were never meant to tolerate. The moment you stop inviting chaos is the moment peace finally has a place to land. And when peace comes, everything changes. Your decisions become sharper. Your boundaries become unshakable. You no longer tolerate emotional crumbs just to feel connected. You stop settling for, it's not that bad, and wait for, this feels right. And the more you protect your space, the more powerful you become. Not loud power, not performance, but real, grounded inner power, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything. The kind that doesn't react. The kind that simply walks away when something no longer aligns. Because now you've made peace a standard, not a reward. This new space you create doesn't just protect you. It attracts better conversations, better opportunities. Why? Because you finally cleared the clutter. You stopped watering dead plants. You stopped pouring into people who never poured back. And that freed up your capacity for the things that truly matter. You are not meant to be in survival mode every time you answer a text. You are not meant to rehearse every sentence before you speak. You are not meant to feel drained after every visit, every call, every message. That's not connection. That's captivity. When you cut toxic people, you are not creating distance. You're reclaiming direction. You're choosing peace on purpose. You're saying, I don't need your approval. I need alignment. You're showing up for yourself in a way that tells the world, this is my standard now. And the people who are meant to be in your life will rise to meet it. The rest will fall away. Let them. That's not rejection. That's redirection. You didn't lose anything. You gained clarity. You gained space. You gained your power back